Hi, it's Lisa Elvin Steltari here from Have Roots Will Travel. I am so excited to be able to present to you. I think what's going to end up being a three-part series with genealogist Amy Urman, where we talk about death records and how to really glean the most information and what paths you can take to be able to really learn more about your ancestor. So, with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our pre recorded Zoom that we did. And I hope you enjoy. Any comments or questions, please feel free to post in the comments below. And that's it for now. Let's get started.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about burial or disposal records. Have you ever seen one of these?
What's that?
Have you ever seen one of these? This is a burial.
I have not, but this reminds me that in Quebec, certainly in the early days, that is what we have is a burial record rather than a death certificate. So from the 1600s on, you're not going to see in French Canada at the very least any kind of death certificate. You're going to see a burial record from the church, the cemetery. So it definitely is interesting. I've never seen this.
Well, this is a burial transit permit. So every time a body is moved, there has to be a permit for it, whether it's going from the hospital to the funeral home or the funeral home to its burial spot. There has to be a piece of paper filled out. Now, are these saved? Not necessarily. Sometimes they're saved for 6 months, or they're saved for a year. Sometimes they end up on eBay, and some wacky broad buys them. Some jurisdictions keep them forever, and they'll be in the state archives or the county archives, or in a local recorder's office or something to that effect. So when Carolyn Williams, oh my goodness, excuse my dog, I'm going to shut my door. Here we are talking death record, and she's getting this much closer. And now she's upset because I shut the door. If your 85-pound South didn't bark so loud, we wouldn't have a problem. So we have this person, Carolyn Humes, a little baby. So she was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we have the date of her death as January 22nd, 1946. And then they're going to have her buried, but she's being buried in Glasgow, Kentucky. So in order to move that body across lines, we need to have a permit. So this would be great if we found out this baby had died in Indianapolis, and we're looking all over for a cemetery listing. We're not going to find it in this area because this baby was buried in Kentucky.
Fascinating.
Just another thing to check for. And again, everything is subject to jurisdiction. What works in Arizona doesn't work in Illinois. What works in Illinois doesn't work in Texas. So you really have to do your homework before you do your looking.
Okay.
Which is, getting into the location and finding some more information about it. And maybe we could talk about that one time too, because it's really important to do a little bit of research. I can give you a really quick example. I don't want to go too off topic, but I had a client that hired me to find, I can't remember, I think it was a marriage certificate in Silver City, New Mexico.
Oh.
And it should be easy, but during that time period, Silver City was hit by a flood and it washed the town out.
Oh, wow.
So he said, oh, I hired like 4 other genealogists and they couldn't find the record. It's like, because the record was destroyed with the flood. And that's why he's like, I don't know about your genealogists. You genealogists, they charge me all this money and give me nothing. It's like, well, we can't pull a rabbit out of the hat, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and if any of those other genealogists had just done a quick history of the area, they would know those records don't exist.
Okay.
That was before it was a state level.
Okay.
It was prior to that, when it was a territory. So
Would there be an, like a replacement of a marriage record? Like there, it's not like, like the birth certificates that we had, the delayed birth certificates. There wouldn't
yeah,
be any kind of, okay.
I didn't find one. But like I said, this is prior to New Mexico becoming a state.
Oh, okay.
I think once it became a state, of course, we had the state back up and we had more information. But prior to that, when that flood went by, it's tough luck. That's
Okay.
probably what people in North Carolina are going to be going through. They're going to be contacting the state to get some copies of their original records. But
Yeah.
at this point in time, there were no original records to
Wow.
hand
Okay.
up. So we need to keep that in mind. We need to know if there was a tornado or a hurricane or a flash flood.
Would one way of looking for that would be in a newspaper obituary where it states that she's going, like, and then you would know, like,
Yeah, that's one way. I tend to go to historical societies.
like when do you look for the burial, like for that transit? Do you automatically look for it or do you?
I try to do research before I research. So
Okay.
I will find the location and just kind of like go to WikiTree or not WikiTree, but the Wiki, put the information in and see
Yeah.
if anything's happened. And then I check historical societies. They usually have something up on their webpage, or if I'm there in person, I'll go to the historical society and see
Okay. Perfect.
a little bit of information. But yeah, or just a regular Google search for history or a Google book search for that area to see if it talks about a disaster or something.
Okay.
So other things that are created at the time of a service, we have financial ledgers, guest books, the memorial cards or the mourning cards. We have funeral invitations depending on the year. They send invitations versus just being it open to the public. You had to have an invitation to get into a funeral. We have the death notices, the obituaries. We have photographs and sympathy cards and letters. So this is an invitation to a funeral. So this couple is saying that their daughter has passed away, and this would have been messengered or sent to somebody that they would like to come. And this funeral service was held in their home. They were in Independence, Kansas, and
And this is 1919.
1919. Oops, there we go. We'll talk a little bit about cemetery records. This is from Holy Hope Cemetery. The picture is from Holy Hope Cemetery here in Tucson.
Oh,
It's the Catholic cemetery here. So the sexton records, they'll have information about the burial itself, the cause of death and the date. But our important records are who else is buried around the person, who ordered that monument, who ordered this sculpture.
okay.
Because whoever ordered this and paid for it, more than likely is a member of the family. And then who paid for the burial and who paid for the plot itself. And then if we could find any funeral information. All great hints. So this is from Illinois. It is a deed from the Cemetery Association. And it says
Wow.
that they purchased lot 11 and it has 4 burial spaces. And it tells us where it's located. So we know once we access this library that there's up to 4 people associated with this couple that we need to look for.
Okay.
The plots might not all be filled, but they bought for 4, so I'm pretty sure they're going to end up using all 4.
Okay.
This is from 1899, almost 1900. This is that Concordia Cemetery, that German Lutheran cemetery I was telling you about. So they purchased this plot in June of 1899. It's signed down at the bottom by 2 siblings, Theodore and William. So looking at this, probably the first question we should be asking is, why are these brothers buying a plot at this moment? They're in section 9. Ends up, after doing a little bit more research, there are 6 graves. We know they paid $25 for 6 graves in 1899, but there's got to be a reason they didn't just run out to Concordia Cemetery and decide to buy a plot. So probably one of the first things I'm going to do is do a little research on the Meatel family and see who died around June of 1899. It ends up
Okay, go.
that
Sorry.
it was their mother, and she had married again, and her name was different. But it makes sense after we look at other records. Now we know why they bought it, because normally you just don't out of the blue. Well, maybe now. Back then, you didn't just buy a bunch of plots because you wanted to buy a bunch of plots. That first
Well,
initial purchase, the first initial purchase back then was usually for a reason.
okay. Okay.
So, and then after that, and then it's like, well, I got 5 more plots. we can put people in there. But the first one, they didn't eat their lunch and go, William, well, yes, Theodore, we should go down to Concordia Cemetery and just
Buy a plot.
for a plot. Yeah. It doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that way.
I
So
wanted to ask about the longevity of that purchase. I mean, is it good for perpetually, or is there?
it is.
Okay.
I have 1.5 plots left there. I inherited
Wow.
those plots. So I'm actually looking for some way of giving it to somebody, because I don't plan on using it. I also have 2 other plots in Illinois that I need to give away to somebody. I don't, it's silly for them to sit there when there's somebody who can't afford it.
The reason why I asked that is in French Canada, they have, or they have had, some cemeteries have 100-year rule. And so after 100 years, whatever you purchase doesn't really apply. And then they just kind of put you somewhere and then resell the plot. Does that happen anywhere else, or?
In Louisiana.
Yeah, well, French, there we go.
I believe that because they have the above ground, and they just put people on top of people, and then
Okay.
So it again, that's a jurisdiction. It never hurts to look up state law regarding cemeteries.
Yeah.
I wonder if I have a slide in here, because you never
'Cause
know.
we'll find the burial record for someone, but the grave is long gone. You know what I mean? Like from 1600.
Right.
So I have a burial record, but the gravestone is not there.
Right. You can't go visit.
It's not like in New England when you go and I can go and see my peeps in Connecticut, and they're still there. They haven't moved. But my friends Canadian may have moved.
I think they do that in France or China. I don't remember. I wasn't reading about somebody where they did that. You're renting a space for a while, and then it's never yours. You rent it for a period of time.
Yes, it's kind of like that. Yeah, exactly.
A good old rental agreement. Well, this is that same plot. It's lot 1128, section 9. Remember, that was purchased in 1899.
Yeah.
And here we are in 1946.
Wow.
Clara is spending $763 for perpetual care, meaning that Concordia Cemetery accepted this money, which $763 in 1946 was a good chunk of change.
A lot, yeah.
And it is for the care, including watering, sodding of the graves, and planting. And the last time I was there, my great-grandparents' graves looked horrible.
Oh.
I had a copy of this document, and I walked it into the cemetery, and they had been cutting the grass, but that was pretty much all they were doing. It needed some repairs. And I walked in with this and I said, you need to take care of the graves a little bit better. I have this, you should be doing it. It was paid for.
What was their response?
They said they would get on it.
All right.
I can't imagine they would have done the same if I didn't have proof, but I did have the receipt. So this is my grandmother, Clara.
I wonder, like, so many people would, not have the receipt, right? So you're right.
What's really interesting is this plot, they cut the grass. They don't do a good job around the tombstones, which is what I wanted them to do, because they had the tombstone.
Yeah.
but the plots around them don't have perpetual care. So the
Okay.
grass was like this long. They don't mow there.
Wow.
Only the perpetual
But you
care.
can't see like you.
Yeah,
Yeah, defeats
it's
the purpose.
crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, people, that's horrible. All right, this is that same cemetery. I went in there and I said, "Do you have any other people by the name? Oops, by the name of Meatal?" And they're like, "We have quite a few associations with the name Meatal." And if you look, we have Boems,
Yeah.
Adolf Blank, we have Emily Meatal, some more people with the last name Blank. So now we know that there's some association between the Boems, the Blanks, and the Meatals because they wouldn't all be buried in the same plot. This
Okay.
is a different plot. It's 1031, and it's in the same, it's in section 9 also. And then they also could tell me that this person died of mumps and this person died of meningitis. Then we have, um, this is lot 62, and we have all these names in there. So we know that these are Meatals that are also related, but there's shucks buried in here.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be burying the shucks and the Meatal together unless, again, there was a relationship.
Okay.
So we need to figure out, we have infant of Theodore Meatal. We have Gustav Schuck. We have Johann, who's a baby boy. So we can assume that it's probably um, Theodore's. Then we have Ferdinand Schuck, and we have the date. So this guy is 52. Gustav was 19. We have a 70-year-old Caroline Schuck. And look at, she died in 1899, which is about when that baby died.
Wow.
In 1899. And then we have all these different dates. Here's Hedwig. Remember, we saw her, Hedwig, and she's buried here. But look at the addresses. We have 700, 771. So we have Mr. Schuck is at 700 West 20th. We have Ferdinand at 771 West. We have Willie Schuck, same address.
Okay.
And then we have Hedwig and Caroline. And we know Hedwig is the daughter of Theodore and his wife Johanna. And now we have Caroline Schuck living in the same house with Hedwig Meatal. So considering her age, it's like maybe this is a mother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
We need to do a little bit more research, but this is giving us some more questions to ask. We got some relationships that need to be defined, and we need to find out a little bit more information about these people that are buried with that same surname. So more hints, more questions that we need to ask. Then we have applications for headstones. So these are military headstones, and the government supplied the headstones for free for veterans, but you had to fill out your paperwork. So we have this gentleman, James Allen. He was a private. We have what military outfit he served with, all that information up here. We have the date of his death. We know that he was residing in Arkansas, and we know the name of the cemetery and where the cemetery is located. So that's huge. Then we have that this headstone is being shipped to Mrs. Roxy Lula Adams. Well, looks like there might be a relationship there, right?
Wow.
Now we need to find out, who is Roxy? Is Roxy James's spouse? We don't know. We got to find out some more, but we have a name to look for. And then we have the address, Route 5, Box 44. We need to see, that's a postal box on a route. So we might be able to find some information as to where they were living with the
Okay.
address. And then it says it's coming from Tate, Georgia, is where it's shipping from. So we have a whole bunch of information that is brought up by this. We we need to find the family member. We need to verify Roxy. Now that we have his date of death and we know where he died, we can get a death certificate. We know that he's being buried at this cemetery, so we need to do a little research at the cemetery, find out who else is buried there, if there's any other family members. And then we have a possible address that we can do a little bit more research to find out some more information on the family. So that one document gave us what, 6 or 7 leads.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of sitting there looking through every piece of information and asking that extra question.
Oh, yeah.
Which, as a newbie, a baby genealogist, I never would have asked those questions. I would have said, he's dead. This is
He's dead. I made him dead. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about church records. So this is a listing in Michigan, Indiana, St. Paul's Church, and it's for Skibby William, and it's showing that he was born on this date, 15th August, 1870, and that that he was deceased in 1956. So we have, he was 46 years. So with this information, it being a church record, we know to look for some more Skibby family members in this church to see if we can find other hints for marriages or confirmations or baptisms. So once we find that one record, we need to do a little bit more research in those congregational records.
So what kind of, what would be your next step?
Well, since this is a Lutheran church, I would probably go through, if it was evangelical, their archives is in one place. And if it was Lutheran Senate, their archives would be in another place.
Okay.
I would check locally first to see if the records are locally available or if they're on Family Search.
Okay.
And if they're not, then I'm going to go to one of those Lutheran archives to look for records. This is St. Bonaventure. It is a Catholic church, and a number of my relatives went to this church back in the day. This is actually, I believe, from Family Search. So the records from 1862 to 1893. It just a short listing of some of the people that have passed away, and it tells us the cemetery. So the cemetery, like this is Maple Grove, that's St. Elmo, St. Bonaventure, St. Clair, St. Bonaventure. We have a priest that is listed, and then we have some additional information on some people, whether it was an accident or old age. But we know the date of death and we know the date of burial. So we might want to check newspaper records at this point. We might want to check other church records to see if there's any other information regarding these families, because we know that they were involved in this church, or they wouldn't. Definitely the Catholic Church. They're not going to do a burial service for somebody who is not Catholic and in their congregation. Yeah. So that's telling us that we need to look for other family members. Since we know the date of death, now we can get a death record if it's available from the state or from the county. Half the time, our problem is not knowing exactly when somebody died, but a church record can lead us to the exact date. You know how happy states are when we say, oh, we're pretty sure that he died in 1900. And they're like, we're not searching the 1900s.
No.
But this church record really narrows it down.
We'll narrow it down.
And, now we have a precise date of death. This is just an example from Archival Grid. And I just ran Catholic church records. And these are two of the things that came up. So here in Tucson, the Diocese of Tucson is closed for genealogical research. But somehow or another, the University of Arizona got copies of the records from 1721 to 1957.
Wow.
So even though the diocese is closed and won't let me into their records, a quick check at the University of Arizona, I can go over there and look at records.
Is that something new? Did they just decide to?
Um, it depends. It changes, but for the last, I'd say the last 7 to 10 years,
Yeah.
we've not been allowed to access their genealogical
Is
records.
that something that's going on in other communities as well, or
No,
no?
other communities are awesome. Illinois, you can go research. Wisconsin, they're great about
Okay.
giving information.
Okay.
Uh, there's just something about the diocese here in Tucson. They're not willing to share the information, but we have found a way around them.
Very good.
And then this is the Maryland State Archive Special Collection. So they have a whole bunch of information from the Protestant um, Episcopal parishes.
Okay.
So don't forget to check those special collections that could be at a state archive or at a university's collection.
Okay. Brilliant. Love it.
We'll talk a little bit about wills. This is another will, and he is naming members of the family. So he's saying Nancy Poundstone, she's going to get this, and then these wills say this is going to go to my son Richard, and Henry and George, and my daughters. And this will very nicely named his daughters married names. Thank you. That doesn't happen very often.
No.
But we have to consider a will being probated. We know that he's died. We have the date of his death per the probate information. And depending on what's in the will or the probate, we can find out new clues about the family. So now we have all the names of the children that were living when this will was made. Not necessarily, when it's probated, because the will was made, this will was made in 1895, and I think it was probated like in 1910.
Okay.
But we know that a picture in 1895, when this was made, we know that he was in Young America, Cass County, Indiana, and we know that he's telling us about his family and his land at this particular point in time. So
Wow.
it may not be true when it's probated, but in 1895, he talks about, his personal property, things that he has. He has chickens. It talks about his land, and it talks about his children. So we know all of this was true for his word in 1895. Now we need to find out the information on his children and his land and the stuff that's listed in his will. We need to check the status of that and how the land was transferred, and if these children are still alive. This is from that same, no, this is from Lena Poundstone's estate. And in there was the report from the appraiser. And if you look down here, the executor is Frank. And we have an attorney. And then it lists here all the heirs and if they're deceased and what their relationship is.
Okay.
So that's going to save us a whole bunch of looking for people. We got their names. We know where
Nice.
they're living at this point in time. So all we have to do is match up the names to the time period and move forward from that. This is kind of the same thing. This is a Cook County coroner's inquest. So this is an inquest into how somebody died. Quick story about this. The family went to take care of the records for the funeral for their son. And the funeral taker said, "Oh, you guys look a little sad. Why don't you take my horse and buggy and take it for a ride, see if you can cheer yourselves up a little bit." And on the way back to the funeral home, they were hit by a train.
Oh my goodness.
So what's interesting about this is we get the information about the accident. We get the information about people who might have witnessed it. And then we find out if people are related and what their addresses are.
Wow.
A lot of information. As you can see, this is actually the one that fell, but it gives us all kinds of information. Go through because I know I'm talking a lot. these are all the people that were in the carriage. Albert, Dorothea.
Unbelievable.
It goes on to different pages, but it also in this document, I didn't put the whole document up, but it says um, description of property found. So it also lists the items that they found around the accident. What's really kind of cool is this watch and chain I have,
Oh, so you
and
have the
I can
provenance, provenance.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So we
And
know that it went.
one would think that for such a horrendous accident, there would be a newspaper
There
somewhere.
is. There's
Okay.
a lot of newspaper information, and they actually changed the law, forcing trains coming into Chicago to slow down. They were coming in between 85 miles to 100 miles an hour
Oh my
at
goodness.
this point in time.
Wow.
So this death on top of the previous death was just so much. And they found out that people weren't at the gates. They actually had people that would physically go out and put the gates down for the trains, and the people weren't doing their jobs.
Wow.
And then they decided the city of Chicago actually passed a law that lowered, I think they can't come in greater than like 45 or 50 miles an hour.
Yeah, I've come into Chicago by train and it's a slow process.
Yes. And this is why. This is why.
Okay.
And these are not the only people during this time period that were hit by trains. There were a
No,
lot.
no, exactly. But oh wow, fascinating.
And
Oh,
here's some newspaper articles: man, wife, and their little daughter killed by train. And then this is the coroner.
okay.
Um, his findings were also put in the newspaper. And then we have an inquest that was done. This one is in Maryland. It talks about how the person died, where they died, um, witnesses. Said Abram McKennell was found lying within a distance of 30 yards from where he was found. Looks like he was still living, and then he ended up dying. So this guy was out. I think he froze to death. If I was
Oh my.
oh, I'm sorry. This is the one from burns. So cause from burns from unknown
Okay.
cause.
Okay.
So the other thing about this is this person died in a very tragic way, as the previous inquest. They died in a tragic way. We have to keep in mind how that this might have affected the rest of the family. Did this gentleman's house burn down? Was the family displaced? These are clues for more information for us to look for. So in this case, since he was found due to the burns, we're going to look at newspaper information. We're going to look at property records to see if this property was condemned at some point, if something would have happened. It just gives us more clues for looking
Absolutely.
for information.
And so we come to the end of part 2 of Genealogy Girl Talk, where we are exploring today the death records and how we can even refine and find out more information than just the date of death. So stay tuned and we will explore more in part 3.